Bill Christopherson is joining us. Bill is a person of many hats. I know, again, in this context, we were talking to him as the author of The Man from Clear Lake, Senator Gaylord Nelson's biographer. He's also a former chair of the group Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice, and much of his work these days is devoted to work with homeless veterans over in Milwaukee. Bill, also a veteran himself of the Vietnam War. Hey, Bill, welcome to A Public Affair.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
So glad you could join us. You know, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the speech that we were just playing, but you know, just as I've gone through this experience of helping plan for this, and by the way, I meant to, at the outset, just to interest of full disclosure, I'm the president of the State United Nations Association, which is one of the groups planning this event on Sunday. But it struck me over and over again. We keep coming back to this wonderful friendship that existed between Gaylord Nelson and George McGovern, values shared, family history shared. But you know, as you listen to that speech, could you hear a bit of Gaylord Nelson in there in terms of some of his aspirations as well?
Well, yeah. Clearly, Senators McGovern and Nelson shared a lot of the same political philosophy, their view of life, and how democracy was supposed to work. They were. I can't say that I know for sure that they even knew each other before they were in the Senate, but they were elected at the same time in 1962. And they were seatmates. They sat next to each other in the Senate for 18 years, and they both left the Senate, lost their seats in the Reagan landslide in 1980. So that's a lot of time together, a lot of time talking about things, and not just in the Senate, but you know, socially too. When they first moved to Washington after Gaylord was elected to the Senate, at least at the beginning, the McGoverns and Nelsons lived near each other in Chevy Chase, and it's hard for some of us to imagine what it was like. I mean, the Hubert Humphrey lived down the street, I think, or next door. You know, the idea that these sort of Midwestern liberals all hung out together both in the Senate and outside of the Senate is fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was a you know, turned into a lifelong friendship and some you know, critical work together on some issues like the war in Vietnam. Of course, there's the 1972 campaign that we can talk about a little bit. And other Wisconsin connections for George McGovern that were not just Gaylord Nelson related. I mean, it was Wisconsin that gave him his first primary victory in 1972, the one that really kind of made him a serious candidate and let him go on to win the nomination. That was also the beginning of political activism for a lot of Wisconsin people who became energized by the McGovern campaign and went on and spent the rest of their lives as political activists. You know, the one that comes to mind is Midge Miller.
Yeah.
But Bill Dixon, for example, who a lot of you know, I'm sure you know, in Madison, was George McGovern's campaign manager in Wisconsin in 1972. So there are a lot of Wisconsin ties over the years.
Well, one of the things you captured in the book that I think is maybe not widespread knowledge is that it epitomizes this tightness, this closeness that the two men had, was that McGovern sought out Gaylord Nelson's advice, not only sought out his advice in terms of his vice presidential pick, but actually invited him to be that pick.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting story. They in '72, as the Democratic Convention approached, and it was all but decided that McGovern would be the nominee. He and Gaylord had lunch in Washington near the Capitol one day, and talked, among other things, talked about whether Gaylord would have any interest in running for vice president. And he at the time he said no, that wasn't really anything that interested him. He said, maybe I would run if you could guarantee me that we wouldn't win and I wouldn't get the job. He said, but from everything I know about it, and from what Hubert Humphrey has told me about it, who was a good friend of both of theirs and had been the vice president, he said it's a terrible job and it's not something I want to do. The truth is, he was really comfortable in the Senate, where he had a lot of friends, he had some influence, he was working on issues he cared about.
As you write about it, it sounds like he didn't want to compromise. He didn't want to have to all the politically pragmatic things you have to do as vice president. He wanted to be true to himself in a lot of ways.
Well, right, that was part of it, and so that conversation didn't really go anywhere. But then the next week, after the nomination became official, Senator McGovern called him again from Miami, and at that point it was to actually ask him whether he would join the ticket. After getting the nomination, Senator McGovern had always held out the hope that maybe Ted Kennedy would run with him, although Kennedy had said no, that there was always a hope that maybe he would change his mind, and in the last analysis he would do it because for the good of the party and what have you. And so he tried once more after getting the nomination, and that didn't go anywhere. Kennedy said he'd sleep on it, but the next morning he said no, that he would not run. And then they had kind of a brainstorm session in the McGovern suite and had a long list of people that maybe might be prospective candidates, including everybody under the sun practically. Walter Cronkite was on the list. Pat Lucey, a Wisconsin governor, all sorts of people. But after making a few inquiries and calling some of the people, it got down to where there was something like an hour left before the deadline for him for the convention to nominate somebody for vice president, and the only people left on the list were Larry O'Brien, who was the Democratic National Committee chair, and Tom Eagleton from Missouri, the U.S. Senator, and McGovern said, I'm not really comfortable with either one of them. I'm going to call Gaylord Nelson. And I've sat next to him all these years in the Senate. I know him. I know his strengths and weaknesses, and he knows mine, and we share the same views, and I have confidence in him that he's somebody of integrity. I heard Lyndon Johnson say, pick a vice president you can absolutely trust, and that's how I feel about Gaylord. And so he called Gaylord, who said no again. Basically said he sort of blamed it on his wife, Carrie Lee, and he said, I needed an out. I said that, she would never let that happen, and that we had an understanding that I would not run for national office and that sort of thing. Actually, Carrie Lee said she can't remember that he ever consulted her about a political decision he made in his life, but that was his out.
Gotcha.
And instead, he said, I'll tell you who you should pick and who really wants the job is Tom Eagleton, who's a close friend of Gaylord's too. And McGovern's hesitation was that he didn't really know Eagleton that well, and Gaylord gave a little sales pitch and vouched for him and said, I think he would really be an asset on the ticket. And McGovern hung up and called Tom Eagleton, who said, I'm going to accept before you change your mind.
All right.
And
of course,
people, I think, know what happened later. 18 days later, he did change his mind, and Eagleton had to leave the ticket. There were reports that he had been treated for depression, and he had electric shock therapy, and at the time, that was a disqualifier. I don't know if it would be now, but at the time, it ruined his candidacy and pretty much ruined any even long shot chances that McGovern had, because it kind of destroyed any momentum that came out of the convention. They were in disarray for a couple of weeks. He finally settled on Sergeant Shriver as a replacement.
Bill, we'll give you a chance just to finish this narrative in just a second, but Senator McGovern did go back to Gaylord Nelson once again, as he needed to make a choice for a replacement. Is that right?
Well, for what he did, actually, in the end, after some conversations back and forth between Senator McGovern and Senator Eagleton about was he going to leave the ticket or stay on, and so on, there ended up being a final meeting the day that Eagleton withdrew from the ticket, just off the Senate floor in a private room there that the senators only had access to, and the only other person in the room besides McGovern and Eagleton was Gaylord Nelson, who both of them had asked to be there. It was kind of both of them would have said probably that he was their best friend in the Senate.
Yeah.
So he kind of he insists he didn't play any role. He said he was just there, but it seemed like they both relied on him to kind of guide them through it and help make it all work. And and he remained great friends with both of them. Obviously, there were some strained relations between McGovern and Eagleton over the years. Carrie Lee, Gaylord's wife, said that she thinks that the first time that George McGovern and Tom Eagleton were at the same event together and in the same room might have been for her 80th birthday party 10 years ago. So it took a while, but it would be entirely appropriate if that were true, and it was at the Nelson's house, because there's a lot of socializing that went on there with the McGoverns and the Eagleton.
And once again, it was Gaylord Nelson and brought them back together again, it sounds like.
Right.